All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here and joining us for another Friends from the Field webinar. And this webinar is about wild blueberry fields, and we're joined by Dr. Lily Calderwood from the University of Maine. My name is Marin Brock, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for Blue Hill Heritage Trust. And these webinars are co-hosted with Island Heritage Trust, so we also have Noelle from Island Heritage Trust on the panel today. And before we begin, I wanted to say that we've been doing these webinars for a few years now. And if you're interested in looking at past webinar archives, you can find them on our website or on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars and online resources are free and open to the public, and every person is welcome to attend and take advantage of these learning opportunities. So if you appreciate the work we do and are interested in making a donation or contribution to our work, then you can donate on our website. And if you're already a donor, then thank you for your support. And I just want to mention that our next webinar is going to be with Dr. Charlie Rolski and Michelle Berger from the Shaw Institute, and that one is going to be on March 14th. And they're really excited to talk about the work that they're doing with researching PFAS in the coast of Maine, which I think is a very pertinent issue right now. So now I'm going to pass over to Noelle, who will talk about some housekeeping and logistics, and then I will introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Marin. Hi, everyone. So excited to see that we have over 30 people here to learn about blueberries. Before we started recording, we were just chatting about how incredible it is that blueberries are just a part of our surrounding here, the peninsula, for us down on the island, Deer Isle. So yeah, we're excited to learn today. If any questions come up, save them for the end. You could drop them in the Q&A at any point, but at the end of Dr. Lily's presentation, we will read them to her and answer them at the end.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Noelle. So for today's webinar, we are joined by Dr. Lily Calderwood, who is the University of Maine Extension Wild Blueberry Specialist. She has been in this position conducting applied research and education for wild blueberry farmers and landowners for 6 years. Her current research and education projects include finding ways to make water more available to wild blueberry plants, better understanding wild blueberry plant nutrition and weed management, and creating educational materials for organic wild blueberry growers. So, all right, without further ado, please take it away, Lily.
Okay, thanks for joining today. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about wild or low bush blueberry production. And thanks for that nice introduction, and thanks for having me. The wild blueberries are grown in this part of the world here, which is where we also live. And so 10,000 years ago, Maine was covered in ice. And the green here shows where the Laurentide ice sheet was present. And our wild blueberries are living in places of glacial till. I'm sure you've heard about glacial till, but as the glaciers receded, as the ice was melting, that created glacial outwash plains where blueberries are now growing in Washington County, Maine, on those flat open fields. And it also scraped away material and left behind a lot of ledgy outcrops. And those ledgy outcrops are present in the Blue Hill area, Ellsworth area, but also in mid-coast Maine, and that's where wild blueberries are growing in those regions. So it's a plant that lives, has been here for a long time. It's a native plant. And within Maine, our production regions are really down east, which we consider to be Hancock and Washington counties, and then mid-coast, Ellsworth, and Blue Hill. But the circle doesn't quite cover you guys, but and then there also are wild blueberry fields, across the state of Maine. You go hiking and you see them everywhere. But there is a group of commercial fields in Western Maine as well. Some are also present in Cumberland County. And before I go any further, I want to make sure that we acknowledge that it's a crop that was first cultivated or grown in a big way by the Passamaquoddy Native people. And they are still growing wild blueberries. And I work with them on research projects and outreach. They are still the largest independent grower with 2,000 acres of wild blueberries. If you haven't started to follow them on Instagram, feel free. It is an interesting place to learn about their culture. The woman who manages their social media puts up words, native words that relate to their wild blueberry production. So what are these wild blueberries? Low bush blueberries are the same thing as wild blueberries. And so are these actually wild? You have seen these in Maine. So yes, they are wild. The fields have never been planted, and there's never been any commercial breeding. So there aren't varieties that are planted. There aren't cultivars that are planted, which is the case for high bush blueberry. High bush blueberries you buy at a nursery, then they grow upright. They're, as tall as us when they're fully mature, whereas these are low to the ground. They don't grow any taller than 8 inches or so. So it's a native plant to northern New England, but it is present all the way down to North Carolina and up into Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and also into Quebec. So yes, it's a low bush blueberry, but wild blueberry is really a marketing strategy because they're wild, but it is a managed crop. So people are managing this crop so that more blueberries are produced. So pesticides are used, fertilizers are applied, organic certification is available. These growers can apply for crop insurance. They do need to follow food safety regulations. So they're not exempt from other agricultural practices. But in many ways, they are, it is more of a wild crop because it isn't planted and it hasn't been bred. So that means that there's a lot of field diversity. There's a lot of plant diversity within these fields. And in this picture, you can see there are certain plants that are reddish, and then some that are greenish, some that are yellow. So there are these different shades of color. And those are all genetically distinct individuals. So they kind of commandeer a patch, and they're right up against their neighbor who's genetically separate from them, but they can share resources in the root system underground. And so within a field, you can have up to 1,500 genetically distinct individuals, which is incredible and not present in any other agricultural system in the world. So this diversity creates resilience for sure, but it doesn't mean that this crop is immune to climate change or other environmental factors. Within these fields, there are 2 different species of wild blueberry. One is Vaccinium angustifolium, which is the majority of the fields. It's probably 80 to 90% of the wild blueberry in the field. And then Vaccinium myrtaloides is about 10 to 20% of the field. So that one is less common. It blooms a little bit later, and the berries are a little bit more tart, but that's probably because they're just not ripe quite yet. And they will tend to grow, fields on mountaintops and in Western Maine really have a higher percentage of this myrtaloides type. So the Vaccinium angustifolium, which is most of the field, is on the left here, and we call that low sweet. That's a common name. And then the Vaccinium myrtaloides on the right, that's what we call a sour top. So the sour top has these hairs on the stem and on the leaves. And so when you look in the field, maybe now you'll notice that certain plants have these leaf hairs and others don't. And that's the easiest way to tell them apart. Here's a picture of, this is a drone image looking down at a wild blueberry field. These are just kind of neat to look at because it does reveal interesting things about a field. You can see the white patches are bare spots. And so some farmers who are very particular would want to fill these in and improve the coverage of blueberries across the field. Others would fill them in with pollinator habitat or mulch to improve the blueberry habitat. And you can also see here, there are, these different colors across the field. Some of them are weeds or other plant species. Through the middle of this picture, you can see somebody is harvesting. And so there's a little bit of a red tint as they harvest the crop. This is the wild blueberry plant itself and the root system. It's an illustration of it, but it's pretty accurate. They are shallow rooted plants, so their roots don't go really any deeper than 6 inches or so. And the majority of their roots and activity is within the top 3 to 4 inches. And they grow in a rhizome, which means there's a shoot that comes out and then shoots that come up from that underground root. Blueberries do not have root hairs, which most plants do. And the root hairs take up different nutrients and water. In blueberry, they don't have those. And they have evolved in such an acidic condition that they partner with mycorrhizae fungi to extend their network underground. And so the mycorrhizae fungi are actually the ones taking up the nutrients and bringing it to the blueberry. So I'll talk, some about wild blueberry production in a commercial sense, but then I also have information here for homeowners. So hopefully there's something for everyone here. Here, in a commercial sense, we are trying to keep the habitat in an early successional stage, which in this image here, you can see on the left, a pioneer community is lichens and mosses. So you could picture that as those are the first plants to come into an ecosystem after a burn or disturbance. And then the second, this early successional time is when grasses, herbs, shrubs, and tree seedlings come into the habitat. So that's the place where wild blueberries are. And so our goal as land managers is to keep wild blueberry present by keeping the habitat in an early successional state. So not letting the trees grow taller than, a few feet, really removing the trees, removing all these other plants that compete with the wild blueberry. But by keeping it in an early successional stage, the blueberries have enough sun, basically, to grow. So this is a unique agricultural system, and that brings challenges and resilience. So some of the positives are that within a field, you have a mix of drought and pest tolerance, which means, one plant may be very susceptible to drought. And so in a drought year, it's really not going to produce many berries at all, or they'll be so small you can hardly pick them. And then other plants will be able to withstand drought very well. And so they would have a crop in those drought years. For other examples are pest tolerance. So certain plants in the field are going to be resistant to mummyberry, for example, which is one of our big disease problems, and other plants will not be. So that creates strength in the system because there isn't just it's not a monoculture. It is a monoculture, but within the monoculture, it is diverse, which creates these layers of resistance, which is helpful in terms of an ecosystem. Okay, so we also, other positives are that it is a unique crop to market. That also makes it difficult because consumers don't know the difference between low bush and high bush blueberries. Another positive is that we don't need to plant these plants. They're already there, they're existing. And so for a new farmer coming into this type of work, it is easy. You come in and you can buy a field that already exists. You don't have upfront planting costs. In Maine, some of these rural areas have cheaper agricultural land, and it can fit well into a CSA share of a vegetable farm. And so there is that marketing opportunity. But overall, the value added and fresh pack prices are higher than selling frozen berries. Now, some of the negatives are the lack of consistency in fruit quality. And that means that because of all this diversity across the field, you have some plants that are ripening early, some that are ripening in the middle of the season, and then some that are ripening late. And so you end up with, as you go across the field, the farmer is only going to harvest a field one time. So they go across and they harvest it all, which means at the beginning of the season, they have a lot of loss for green fruit that they have to kick out. In the middle of the season, it's really perfect. They've got most fruit coming in a really high quality. And then at the end of the season, they have a lot of overripe fruit that they've got to kick out. High bush blueberries have been bred to be, an early ripening variety. And so you plant that in one row, you just go down and harvest it and you're done. Then the next one comes in, it's a mid-season ripening variety. You're ready to go after the early one. So plant breeding really changed a lot of how we grow crops. And that did not happen for wild blueberry, which is it's very fascinating. And we are thankful for that because we have this really interesting crop here in Maine. So it is grown on a 2-year cropping cycle if you're really farming it. And so I'll just go through what that means. In the prune year, what we call the prune year, this is year 1 of the cropping cycle. These are the activities that are done. So you prune the field by mowing or burning in the fall or the spring after harvest. And then in that year, you would do weed management, the plants grow. Then if you have irrigation, you would irrigate, you would fertilize. And this year is all about bud development. So until the summer solstice, there are leaves forming. And then around the summer solstice, the plant senses that the daylight is changing. They're now shorter days. And so now it transitions into a reproductive phase, which is to create buds for the following year. This is what the leaves and buds look like. And then in the crop year, we have mummyberry and weed management in the early spring, right before bloom. And when the flowers are about to bloom and in bloom, that's when they're most susceptible to mummyberry disease. So that's why that management needs to happen then. But farmers do not spray during bloom because of the bees. And so then we have bloom that happens for about 2 to 3 weeks in May to June, kind of Mother's Day to Father's Day, overlaps exactly with black fly season. And then we have green fruit development. You would irrigate again if you had that ability. Then there are some fruit flies that like blueberries just as much as we do. So those fruit flies would be managed if you were a conventional grower. And then they develop color and turn blue and they're ready to harvest. And then you have some post-harvest weed management if you are interested in that. And then you would prune again in the fall or the spring. These are pictures of flowers, then fruit turning blue and blue fruit. So this is just a picture of prune and crop fields. On the right, there's a prune field in the spring, and on the left is a crop field. So and a lot of farmers have their land set up this way. They have about 50% of their blueberry land in prune and 50% in crop, so that every year they have approximately the same number of pounds of blueberries that they can sell, which helps them have a reliable market. The people they're selling to want to make sure that they will always get this much berry. So I'll briefly go through the season in pictures here. I did just explain it on that one slide, but this is the prune year emergence. So this is a field that was just burned, and here come the little blueberry plants poking out of the ground in May. This is always a nice time of year because it's warm, the soil is warm. And so once the soil is warm, they pop right out. And then we have this vegetative growth, which is a time when the plants are most susceptible. So we try not to drive through the fields then because the leaves are so new. Then we have this stage called tip dieback. I was kind of referencing, this is the transition from vegetative growth to reproductive growth. So once the top leaf of the stem dies back, this brown thing on the top of the stem, once it dies back, then that triggers the plant hormones to shift direction. So they actually were going up making leaves. Now they switch and go down and they start making buds at the bud nodes. Here are some buds growing. And then in the fall, these fields turn red and they're just beautiful. In the winter, the prune fields, they're just stems. So the leaves fall off and they go through the winter as just these sticks with buds on them. So there are buds out here. And in certain winters, we have a lot of winter kill from dry, desiccating, cold wind. It's also a problem with climate change because we have some springs where the blueberries will wake up a little too early, and then they're more sensitive, and they may be hit by a frost in the spring, which happened this year. So here are these pictures of our bud development and fruit development. Then we move into the crop year. So in the crop year, the first activity is really bloom and pollination. There are a lot of bees required for wild blueberry production. Maine brings in about 50,000 honeybee hives each year from out of state. A lot of them come from North Carolina, New Jersey, and then some do come from California. So we're using honeybees, but also native and managed bees. Bumblebees are used by some growers. The box up on the upper right is a bumblebee quad. So there are bumblebees in there and they'll pollinate. The bumblebees are actually better, more efficient pollinators than the honeybees for this particular plant, because the bumblebees are native to this region. And so the bumblebees evolved with wild blueberry. And the bumblebees will go and efficiently pollinate a blueberry flower in one trip. And that's because they're buzz pollinators. They land on the flower and they buzz it, which gets all the pollen on their face, proboscis, and then they'll go to the next flower with that pollen. A honeybee needs to visit a blueberry flower 10 times for it to fully pollinate. And so Why are we using honeybees? Well, because bumblebees aren't as strong in numbers. So one of these quads, I don't know how many bumblebees are in each one, but many fewer than in a honeybee colony hive. And so each hive, of honeybees is much more effective at pollinating in just because of its sheer numbers. So farmers will bring honeybees in, and they'll bring 1 to 2 hives per acre. So it's a lot of hives. But they'll also have these bumblebees because the bumblebees will fly in gray, in foggy days and when the temperature is under 60 degrees, which we have plenty of in the spring. So honeybees will only fly when it's 60 degrees or higher. So they're picky. They like to fly in the sun, in the calm wind, but the bumblebees are always out there. And we do, a lot of growers encourage habitat for native species. There are 265 native bee species in Maine, and a good number of them, not all of them, but a good number are native to wild blueberry fields, so they do also pollinate. So then we move on to fruit development. Once a flower is pollinated, the petals fall off, and you end up with these, what we call pinheads. So there's a little blueberry fruit in here that's gonna, plump up, and it's been fertilized. Then they grow and start to expand, become green fruit. Then they become late green fruit or blushing fruit. Then they're red, and then they're blue. This period between green fruit and blue fruit can happen overnight. It is very fast, depending on the season, on the weather. And as they develop, you have high acidity in the red berries before they're really truly ripe. And then the acidity drops and the sugars increase in the blue fruit. So then we have harvest time. And this is a field of full blue fruit. The fields still look pretty green from far away, but there's a lot of fruit on every field. So organically, farmers can grow between 50 and 4,000 pounds per acre. And conventionally, they can grow 2,000 to 12,000 pounds per acre. There's quite a difference there. But even 500 pounds of blueberries is a lot of berries. So then harvest, there are different ways of harvesting. A lot of people, most blueberries are harvested mechanically now, but there are plenty of farms that do still bring migrant workers to Maine to rake by hand. So you can see the hand rakers on the left. And then in the middle is a walk behind harvester. That makes it a little easier to harvest as a small farm. And then now small farms are moving to using these DH harvesters, which is the one on the bottom. This is a ride-on mower that has a rake attachment in front. And this is very effective. They're, expensive. They're about $30,000, but if you are a commercial grower, this is really the best thing to use now. Then we do have larger harvesters that go on a tractor. And I wanted to mention the fresh pack growers will harvest using hand rakes or this DH harvester because the quality of berries is much higher. The tractor harvesters will damage the berries. The tractor harvester is going along and it can harvest, faster, many acres in a day. And those berries are typically going to be frozen. So they can withstand a little more damage, like bruising. Whereas the fresh pack berries need to be really intact, and the less bruising, the better, because that means they'll last a little bit longer and be more appealing to the public. So here's a fresh pack line. This is a video.
There's nothing wrong with it. Good fruit.
So that's a fresh packed line that, you know, people pick over. They'll pour the blueberries back in over at the beginning, and they go through a winnower, and then they end up on these different belts, and people pick through to take out what the machine missed. So, you know, after harvest, it's pruned again. It can be pruned by mowing, which is the majority of how these fields are pruned now, with a flail mower. So the flail mower is the commercial way to do it. You can do it with a lawnmower. You just want to do it on the lowest setting possible, because you want to cut them to the ground as low as possible, because that means you'll have the best regrowth the following year. And so the shift from mowing to burning happened in the 70s, when fuel prices were becoming very high. So all of the fields used to be burned, and it became very expensive, but it also was an environmental issue. The skies were dark with smoke, and it was an air quality problem. So burning is still done today, but it's not for the untrained, and it is done by organic growers for the most part. Organic growers don't have the tools, they don't have pesticide to use that's effective to manage pests. So burning is really their best tool. And so you can burn either with straw, which this person is doing on the left. They spread the straw in the fall and they let it settle to the ground. And then in the spring, on a wet day with just a little bit of wind, the right weather conditions, he's burning. And you light the fire, and then the straw is the fuel for the fire, which takes it across the field. The other way to burn is with an oil burner, which is a tractor attachment, which is on the right. And both are dangerous. Both ways the fire can get away. So I don't encourage burning unless you can learn from another grower. And we're going to be doing some workshops with the Maine Forest Service actually on burning this spring. So that'll be good. I can go through the cost of production if people are interested, but I wanted to get to a few things. Considerations when purchasing wild blueberry land, or if you have a wild blueberry field that you're interested in bringing back into production, these are some things to consider. When was it last managed? You can bring back a field that was blueberry, but the longer you wait, the more difficult it's going to be. What is the yield history? If you want to make money doing it, it is best to buy fields that had at least 1,000 pounds per acre. And at least 2,000 pounds per acre, excuse me. You want to consider if the field has been de-rocked or land leveled. Depending on how you want to manage the field, you may need to get a tractor out on it. And so having it de-rocked will make it a lot easier. But that being said, some of the fields are really aesthetically pleasing because they do still have all their rocks. And then there are also fields that have a lot of ledge and you can't remove the ledge. Is the field split? I will explain this a little more. But fields, if you want to get a crop every year and you only have one field, you'll have to split it in half. Are there neighbors who care how you manage the field? Are there people walking through it? Are you going to manage it conventionally or organically? How many fields will you manage? Where will you sell the berries? perhaps the first question you should ask yourself. Have you made a budget? So these are really important things to consider, and I'm happy to talk with anyone after this about specific parts of wild blueberry production. So split fields, this is a picture of a field that's, it's the same field, I would say, just half of it is in the prune year and half is in the crop year. So they'll alternate back and forth. For a homeowner, it's a great idea to have half the field in prune, half in crop, so that you have some berries every year. And if you only have one field, then you're going to have to split it in half to get berries every year. The other reason to not split a field is because blueberry maggot fly is a fruit fly pest, and when you have berries in the same field every year, one side or the other, there's a place for these flies to live. But if you starve them out for a year and have the whole field on one cycle, so all of it in prune year one, all of it in crop year one, that prune year is a full year when there are no flies. And so they just kind of die out, which really reduces the amount of pesticide or any control you need to do for these flies. So reclaiming a wild blueberry field, this is a classic picture. And so some fields have grown up like this. So there's a lot of birch and goldenrod in here. These are students of mine doing a weed survey, and they were here for quite a while. The way to bring this field back is to cut out all these trees and all this goldenrod. If you have saplings, you're going to want to cut those down or pull them out. Some people pull them out with a chain on a tractor. That is a one-time deal and really ideal. You want to pull the thing out of there so it doesn't grow anymore. But if you don't have that ability, you can cut these saplings 3 times during the season, which means you would cut once the leaves come out in the spring, you would cut it to the ground. Then you would let it grow up again. You'd cut it again. Then you would let it grow up again and cut it a 3rd time. And the concept here is that you're letting the plant grow, put energy above ground, and then you're removing it. So the root system holds the energy of the plant, and the more you can cut it away, the better. So you got to wait till the plant has put energy into above ground growth, and then cut that away, and you're killing it slowly. Once you get the trees out of the way, you'll want to brush hog the field if you can. Cut it to a higher height if you can't flail mow it. But typically fields are brush hogged and then flail mowed. The flail mower won't do very well with a lot of vegetation to cut. It's really to cut existing fields. Once you have been able to mow the field, then you should take a soil test. And that soil, it may look like this by that point. So you've still got a lot of weeds, or these are goldenrod, just an example. So you'll take a soil test to understand what your soil pH is. And that soil pH is an indicator of your weed control, basically. So we reduce soil pH down to 4.0 to 4.5 in wild blueberry. And that's because the plants can live at that acidic condition, but the weeds can't. So it's a really good way to minimize weed competition. And that's organic approved, and a very good tool for the home land manager. Sulfur and mowing or burning is really ideal. Those are the 2 things that you have to do to keep a field present. Everything else is kind of up to you. You can go in as hard as you want with as much management as you want, but the sulfur, soil pH, and pruning is critical. Here's an example of another field. This field has a lot of grass in it. I'm guessing the soil pH is a little high here because there is so much grass, and grass doesn't handle the acidic soil conditions very well. So you really, the sulfur applications can really help a grass problem. So land managers, this is an interesting crop because different from a vegetable farm where you, or a dairy, where you have your home house, the family house, and then the land surrounding the house is the farm. Wild blueberry land managers are really more like a hay operation where, you know, the family home is somewhere. They may have one field at the home, but then in those surrounding towns, they have many other fields they're managing. We have people do is, you know, you got to think about it and be smart about how you manage these different fields. You want to figure out, okay, I've got this total acreage and I want half of it to be in prune, I want half to be in crop. And getting fields onto the cycle that you want them on can take some time. And you want to think about geographically, where are these fields that where does it make sense for me to have a field? Is this a better quality field? Should I kind of drop this other one that's not producing very well, but take on this other one that's closer to home? So there's some economics involved here. I just wanted to share that, you know, wild blueberry farming looks a little different than diversified veg farming or other, you know, farming endeavors. Sure, this is just reminding me to tell you that if you do have a field that you want to de-rock or have land leveled, it smooths it out. NRCS has money, cost share money that you could apply for. NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they are present in every county in Maine. Okay. Okay, here's the fun part. These are fresh packed berries, and I'll just go through some fun things that are being made with wild blueberries in Maine. So we have a lot of fresh berries, you know, they're just available during the season. And then some folks are making wine, and it's more of a dry wine. Some people like this, some people don't. But there are at least 27 wineries in Maine and New Hampshire that make a wild blueberry wine. And there are beers and distilled beverages made with wild blueberries. I'm sure you have seen. There are also vinegars and hot sauces. Wyman's has recently, in the past few years, really diversified the products that they make. So they make the retail frozen bags of blueberries, but also some juice now and dried powder. There are other small farms that make similar diversified value-added products, which are really great and a really good way for a smaller farmer to make money. So this particular farm, Fields, they sell frozen wild blueberries, and they also make wild blueberry chips that are, you know, dehydrated in a paste and broken up. She makes a tea and like bath salts and soaps and a blueberry powder that's very popular. She also makes a blueberry crisp that's available at the Maine Botanical Gardens, Gardens Aglow. If you run into this crisp cart, I would highly recommend it. It's so good. Brodus blueberries is a good example. They're in Hope, Maine, and they have a distillery, and you can also go and buy fresh berries there during the season. I'm sure you know people in um, in Blue Hill that do the same thing. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are questions. There's always more to talk about, so I want to make sure you have answers to things that you're interested in.
Maren, do you want to start us off with one of the questions in the chat or in the Q&A?
Yeah, that sounds good. Also, I want to say thanks, Lily. That was really interesting. I learned a lot. Yeah, I think it's really cool to know more about this very important, traditional use of the land in this area. So the first question is from James, who's asking how to bring back blueberries after disturbances from machines like earth moving.
Sure. So yeah, earth moving can really destroy the root structure of wild blueberries. And so I would say, it depends on how badly they were damaged. If there's none left, you would probably have to replant. But if there are sections of blueberry left in patches, you could foster those to grow more. So you would, if you have some blueberry left, but let's say there are big sections of nothing left. So you can actually buy, I said that no breeding has occurred, but you can buy wild blueberry plants at nurseries in Maine. And on our wild blueberry website through UMaine, we have a list of those. I can try to pull that up and put it in the chat, but yeah, so we have a list of nurseries that sell wild blueberries, and those are usually in small pots, or you can buy them in 1 foot by 1 foot sod chunks. And so those are pulled or dug right from a blueberry field somewhere in Maine. And so those are sold to landscapers to fill in, landscaping sections. So it's expensive, but you could plant, part of your yard or a landscaping area with purchased plants. But if you're going to do that, you want to make sure that the soil is appropriate for wild blueberry. You want to make sure that the soil pH is correct and that it's not a clay that's just going to hold water. You want a sandy, loamy soil that's well draining. And then you would plant your blueberry, and then you would mulch the field heavily with softwood mulch. And so you can use like 2 to 5 inches of softwood mulch to do that. And then if you have the ability to irrigate, I would irrigate. Depends on the season. If you're really in a drought situation, you don't want these to dry out, in which they would be prone to drying out because of the edges that you have on these sod pieces. Yeah. Mulch is a really good thing to apply to wild blueberry plantings or fields.
Thank you. The next question is from Peter. How quickly would we expect weeds to respond to a lower soil pH from sulfur application? We
Great.
reduced soil pH from 5.0 to 4.5 and are waiting for a response.
Yeah. So it'll take 2 to 3 years to really get it down. But since you know that it did drop from 5.0 to 4.5, I think 4.5 still isn't low enough for your particular field. So that's probably because of your soil type. And you'll want to try to get further down to 4.0. You don't want to go below 4.0, but the organic growers who are only using sulfur to manage weeds, if they get it to 4.0 or 4.2, you'll really see a drop in the weed pressure. Yeah. So you may need to wait a little longer, or, send your soil test to Humane and they'll give you a recommendation on how much more sulfur to put on to get it down to 4.0.
Cool. Thank you for that. The next question from Laura is, has there ever been any effort to produce or raise bumblebees?
Good question. Well, so you can create habitat for bumblebees on your property. And you can look up bumblebee nests to see what materials you could use to do that. I think it's like straw type reeds that they like. Or some species like those. Others like to nest in the ground. So you can create kind of ground patches that are approachable for them. So that's, their habitats, nesting materials you can provide for them. But people are buying bumblebees quads. And so those bumblebee quads that they buy are reared by a lab in Canada or in California. And so entomologists have figured out how to rear and grow a colony of bumblebees. They're just not as social as honeybees. So it's a pretty difficult thing to do. I don't know that you could do it as an individual, but that's where they're coming from. People are rearing them. And it's a queen. So they're called quads, which means that there are 4 colonies within each box that I showed. So each colony has 1 queen and workers. And there's a limit to how big each colony can get because they're partially social creatures. They can live together for some amount of time. But honeybees can live in larger numbers together. So they're like fully social. Yeah. The reason honeybees have become the reason we're so dependent on honeybees is because they're so transportable. There's thousands of bees in each hive and we can bring them across the country, which, yes, is to the bees' detriment. But that's how we grow so much food.
That's fascinating. Thank you. The next question, wondering your thoughts on sulfur application when the fields are near your home, as well as far as well water contamination. Our field is also uphill from our home.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be a problem. I don't think there's ever been water contamination from sulfur, and especially if you're uphill. But groundwater moves in a different way than the contour of the land that we see. So your groundwater may be coming from the bottom of the hill elevation. I would do a water test it now and then test it after you've applied the sulfur, but it shouldn't be an issue.
Cool. So the next question from Peter is, how about fertilizer? Not needed typically?
Right, typically not needed, but commercial growers do apply fertilizer. The trick is that we are bringing our soil pH down to such a low level that a lot of the nutrients are no longer available to the plant. And that they are available at 4.5 to 5. But they're really not available if you're bringing the pH down lower than that. The other factor here is that we don't want to encourage the weeds to grow. So any fertilizer you put out on the field, the weeds are gonna take it up faster than the blueberry. And so they start growing like crazy. And if you don't have good weed control, you really can't apply fertilizer. So for organic growers, we really don't recommend fertilizer. We have done some research that shows you could apply pelleted chicken manure. There's a sweet spot between applying just enough fertilizer and just enough sulfur. And if you can figure that out for your field, that's awesome. Takes some time and attention. But for a conventional grower, if you had very good weed control, which you would have to be using herbicides, you can apply fertilizer because fertilizer often goes hand in hand with herbicide for any crop. When you apply fertilizer, you know, the weeds are going to take some of it. But fertilizer certainly does help plants grow. So, yeah, the chicken manure is an option once you have your weeds under control. And then conventional growers are using DAP, which is diammonium phosphate, or ammonium sulfate. These are fertilizers specifically developed for acidic soils. And if you're curious about those, I'm happy to talk with you more about it. We take foliar leaf samples to determine the rate of fertilizer to apply rather than a soil sample. So the soil samples are used to get your soil pH, but a leaf sample is used to understand how much or what nutrients your plant are actually using.
All right, the last question we have. You mentioned and a factoid just came in from Lisa as well, which could be fun to share. So you mentioned an Instagram that had some information. Do you know the name of that Instagram?
Oh, yeah. It's Passamaquoddy Wild Blueberries.
Okay. And then Maren, do you want to read that fun fact that Lisa sent?
Yeah, so Lisa sent a factoid that says she says there are wild low bush blueberries all over Florida, which I didn't know, but rare. Darrow's blueberry, V. Darrowi, I guess is how it'd be pronounced, and shiny blueberry, V. Mercenitis, maybe? I'm not sure. But that's cool. I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't know there were blueberries in Florida.
Yeah, there are. The V probably stands for vaccinium. So it's the same family, blueberry. And yeah, Florida grows a lot of blueberries. They grow a lot of high bush blueberries. So it's obviously a good place for blueberries to grow. New Jersey also grows a lot of blueberries. So does Michigan. They're all over the world. High bush blueberries are grown in Chile and Morocco now to extend the season. So we can get high bush blueberries in the grocery store all year round, which is a modern marvel, because they're being shipped across the world and grown in warm places in the winter. So that is also fascinating. Those blueberries are also bred to travel. So they have thicker skins. And speaking of fertilizer, they will apply certain fertilizers to thicken the skin even more. But all of that is a sacrifice for flavor. High bush blueberries we grow in our yards taste good, but these are less flavorful just because of how they're bred.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lily. We really appreciate having you here today. This has been very interesting. And thank you
Welcome.
for joining us too.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, incredible wealth of knowledge that you've shared with us. And the presentation was so thorough. I didn't even expect to learn some of the things that you presented. So thank you for putting so much into it. And thank you everyone for joining us.
You're welcome. There was a link I was going to share. Maybe I should email that to you. Or
we could put it in the chat box right now. Actually, I don't know if people have access to the chat box.
Let me.
You could also email it to me. Oh yeah.
Can you read it out loud, or is it a complicated link?
gonna be a complicated one. Um,
And maybe if you share your screen again, you
that's true.
could show it on your screen, I guess.
That's a good idea. Can anyone see this in the chat? No, you sent it just to us. Let me see if I can send it to everyone. No, the chat is only for hosts and panelists, unfortunately.
Okay, so I can walk everybody through this, I guess.
Okay, for people who wanna follow along with your work.
Right.
Okay.
You can go to the Humane Wild Blueberry website. You can Google Humane Wild Blueberries and you'll come up to our website. If you go to Marketplace, there are a lot of resources here, like where to buy equipment, farms selling fresh pack and value-added products, where to buy agrochemicals and fertilizers, a list of commercial pollinators, and then here's the plants and sods list. You can go here, and here's a list we do update every year. That might be helpful. The other thing that's helpful
So helpful.
is if you go to publications, this is where our fact sheets are. So if you're really serious about growing, these categories on the left here will be helpful. It's a little, there's so much on here. We are redoing this website so that it's more user friendly, but if you can't find something, feel free to email me and I will help you.
Mhm.
The weeds area is probably of most interest. So if you go down here, how to test your soil pH on your own. And you can also just send it to the lab. Then this one, soil pH management, is all about applying sulfur, when to do it, how much to put on, how does it work.
Wow, that's
type of-
pretty cool. That's all right there, just written out. It's super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Look, get your blueberry fields back in shape.
right.
Cool.
Thank you
Great.
for sharing that.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
I also just want to say that this link, the link to this video is going to be both on our website and the video will be on our YouTube channel. And I'm going to send both the panelists the link, but to anyone that's watching that wants to watch again or wants to share it, you can find it on our YouTube channel. So with that,
Great.
I think that, yeah, it's time to end, but thank you all for being here. And once again, thanks, Lily. That was great.
Yeah, my pleasure. Have a good evening.
Have a good night, everyone. Bye.
Bye.